Go Kel, glad to have you alongside as we are 1 day out from the 2021 NFL draft. Gonna find out really quickly which direction this draft is going to go. Have some Braves talk to dive into a little bit later in the show. Also going to give you picks 22 through 32 in our final predictive mock draft. I know a lot of folks out there sharing their thoughts yesterday. Cody with a couple of wild picks. Cody off the show today. He'll be back tomorrow, but we do have his picks here. So we'll be able to run through those a little bit later in the show. Heck of a performance from Ian Anderson last night as the Braves are now 1 game under 500, trying to get back to that 500 mark as they start heading into some of the meat of this schedule. And a lot of teams in Major League Baseball trying to get to that 500 mark. So we'll dive into Ian Anderson's unbelievable performance from last night. But a lot of news starting to come out after what's been a really silent kind of interesting past few weeks around the Atlanta Falcons, where a lot of folks think they're going with a quarterback. A lot of folks seem to think they'd be willing to trade back, but the asking price right now for that 4th pick is unbelievably high. But now this morning, Dan Graziano from ESPN.com alongside Jeremy Fowler, they put out kind of their predictive, I'm not going to call it a mock draft. It's really just what they're hearing from everyone at these different picks. And according to them, as of right now, the locked in pick for the Atlanta Falcons, the tight end out of Florida, Kyle Pitts. And I know a lot of people out there have been really pushing for the Atlanta Falcons to take their future quarterback. Reasoning behind it being you don't know if you're ever going to be this high. You sure hope that you're never going to be this high again in the draft. A lot of folks out there want them to trade back. There's so many needs on this team. You don't have a lot of money to spend on this team. And why would you draft just another offensive weapon is the question that a lot of people are asking, when didn't really seem like offense was necessarily the problem. I know a lot of people love to point to the fact that, the Atlanta Falcons scored 39 points against the Dallas Cowboys. It wasn't the offense that kept them from winning that game. But I think when you dive into a little bit more, the offense wasn't quite as proficient as you really wanted it to be. So again, Dan Graziano, Jeremy Fowler, the exact quote from them, and this is an ESPN Plus article. So, quote, Atlanta is expected to stay put and take Pitts, who some would tell you is the best player in the entire draft. And that's not the first time we've heard that either. I know speaking to some people that we've had on the show the last few weeks, yeah, Trevor Lawrence is clearly number 1, but it's because Jacksonville needs a quarterback. Zach Wilson's clearly number 2. It's because New York needs a quarterback. They traded Sam Darnold to Carolina. The new coaching staff that came in up there, they were not willing to stick with Sam Darnold. So obviously they need a quarterback. It's the most important position, but because it's the most important position, doesn't mean they're inherently the best players. The San Francisco 49ers did not leverage 3 first-round draft picks to move up and take a position player. You do that because you're trying to draft your franchise quarterback. You feel like you have your franchise quarterback. All of that being said, that doesn't mean just because the guy gets taken at 4, he's not the best player in the draft. And we've heard from some folks that, hey, Kyle Pitts, a lot of people look at as, if you're picking anybody out of this draft who's going to be a Hall of Famer, he seems like he's that player, that guy who can come in, immediately dominate at whatever position you want to call it, tight end, wide receiver, weapon, slot, whatever you want to call it. He can immediately come in and dominate and fit into whatever system you're trying to run. I know some people out there, San Francisco 49er fans, who aren't overly enamored with Trey Lance and with Mac Jones. I love the thought of maybe you pair Kyle Pitts with a George Kittle. Again, you don't leverage 3 first-round draft picks to move up in the top 3 to take anything but a quarterback. So we can go ahead and push that one off to the side. The San Francisco 49ers are taking a quarterback, but let's look at the Atlanta Falcons. And let's look at all the scenarios, because we kind of touched on this yesterday. And I think Mark Bradley, who's a columnist for the AJC, really put this the best way I think you can put it. What pick makes your team better faster? Because I still think the Falcons believe they're in that window where you have Matt Ryan, you have Julio Jones, you have Calvin Ridley, Grady Jarrett, Deion Jones on the backside. You can have a defense that's good enough when you bring in an offensive coordinator to be your head coach in Arthur Smith. You bring in Team Pease, who's an amazing defensive coordinator, has had an amazing career in the NFL. You get him out of retirement to come back and try to piece this defense together. So you have the offense. You feel like you have the quarterback. What makes you better faster as an offensive lineman? Because Matt Ryan has been the most hit quarterback in the NFL, I believe, the last 2 seasons. I know last season, I believe it's the last 2 seasons, right? Is it an offensive lineman where you can solidify the protection around Matt Ryan and maybe even, I know this is a foreign concept for Atlanta Falcons fans, but maybe you become a ground and pound team where you're picking up 4 or 5 yards at a time. Is that something you can do? Is that what makes you better immediately? It's not a quarterback. You already have a quarterback who's better than any of the top 5 quarterbacks in this draft, right? Matt Ryan right now, in terms of being a quarterback, is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, whoever you want to say. Does it project down the future? No. But right now you put him on a field and you need to win an NFL game. 32 out of 32 NFL coaches are taking Matt Ryan to win that game. So quarterback does not make you better in the short term. Kyle Pitts. You add Kyle Pitts to a Julio Jones, to a Calvin Ridley, to a Hayden Hurst, who is your hand in the ground tight end. I just want you to sit back and think about it for a second. You have the offensive line you have, which you still got to figure out who's playing center, what you're going to do at guard. But I think they like their tackles, and I think they like one of their guards, right? Don't know who your running back's going to be. Probably going to draft one second, third, fourth round. It's a lot of really good running backs in this draft. But just sit back and think about it for a second. You got Matt Ryan at quarterback. Julio Jones is split out on one side. Calvin Ridley split out on the other side. Hayden Hurst's hand is in the ground next to your right tackle. And then in the slot, you got big old number 84, 6'6", 240, 250 pounds that runs a 4.4. If you're a defensive coordinator, who are you double covering? Are you double covering anybody? What kind of coverage are you playing against that? It's a matchup nightmare for whoever you are. And you just give Matt Ryan another guy to throw the ball to. And for everyone saying Atlanta Falcons were in top 10 in offense last year, because they were, so much of that was between the 20s, excuse me. You got to get the ball into the end zone. And what has been one of the biggest things Atlanta Falcons fans have complained about year after year after year, the Falcons can't score touchdowns. It's one of the biggest complaints anyone has about Julio Jones. He doesn't score touchdowns, as has been the knock against Julio, even though you try to put any knock against Julio, I don't know what you're doing or how you're spending your days, but it's been the simple fact that Atlanta Falcons struggle to score when they're in the red zone. And I think a lot of that, more so than the passing game, has to do with the fact that teams, for the most part, could leave 7 in and stop the run pretty easily against the Falcons. When you get down inside the 10, they didn't have to send too many extra guys to stop the run. They felt like their defensive front was tougher than Atlanta's offensive front. And Atlanta, honestly, hasn't had a great running back since Michael Turner. I know Devonta Freeman kind of popped off there for a couple years under Kyle Shanahan, but Kyle Shanahan, as we have seen time and time again, can pretty much turn any running back into a great running back. So since Michael Turner, Matt Ryan really hasn't had a great running back. You had the remnants of Steven Jackson. You had what was left of Todd Gurley last year. You really haven't had a great running back. And I think you kind of made the wrong choice with Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman, right? So if you get into the red zone, and you have Julio Jones that you can do something with. You have Calvin Ridley, who maybe is the savior right now of the Falcons in the red zone with the routes he runs. Oh, and then you have Kyle Pitts over the middle. Who are you going to match up with him? A safety, a linebacker? That, I think, immediately makes you better. And you're 4-12 last year, and you lost so many one-score games. You're 7-9 a year ago, or 2 years ago now, and you just lost so many one-score games. Does Arthur Smith, and we talked about this yesterday, does he feel like he can do more with what Dan Quinn had than what Dan Quinn was able to do with his plethora of offensive coordinators that he rolled through Atlanta? I got to think, if you're a head coach in the NFL, you got to think you're better than everybody else, right? You have to think he might not be able to do it, but you give me Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Kyle Pitts, and Calvin Ridley, I'm putting up 35 points a game, no problem. I have to think that's where he's at with this. And so right now, again, reports from Dan Graziano and from Jeremy Fowler on ESPN.com. The quote again: Atlanta is expected to stay put and take Pitts, whom some would tell you is the best player in the entire draft. And again, it's an interesting scenario because really don't feel like the Atlanta Falcons can get this one wrong. And I know I probably just jinxed it. I know people are probably slapping their hand against their forehead right now after I said that. But again, we have to realize Thomas Dimitroff isn't making this pick. Dan Quinn isn't involved in this pick. We got to trust Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, two guys who come from great backgrounds, have great pedigrees inside the NFL. We just got to trust those guys to make this decision. But think about it. Are you going to be upset if they take Justin Fields? Are you going to be upset if they take Kyle Pitts, who, again, most people think might be the best player in this draft? Would you be mad if they took Penei Sewell, a guy who would be a bookend starter for you in your offensive line for the next decade? Would you be mad if they traded back and took a Patrick Surtain who you could pair? Because literally name two of the corners in the Atlanta secondary that's not Sheffield. All right, that's what I thought. It's bad. I think Kevin Thomas might have to start at boundary corner for the Atlanta Falcons week 1 right now, unless they can go out there and find somebody because they're walking in that cornerback room right now. There's a lot of empty chairs. So I wouldn't be upset if they trade back and you take a JC Horn, you take a Patrick Surtain, and you just grab more picks. Because again, you don't have a whole lot of money to spend on free agents. Actually, you have no money. I think you have under $1 million right now to spend on free agents. You're gonna have to restructure Grady Jarrett's contract or somebody else's contract if you're going to sign this rookie class. So a lot more intrigue in this one. But again, I don't think there's a way they get it wrong. But being an Atlanta sports fan, you know how quickly that can just jump up and bite you. So hey, we'll find out tomorrow night. Atlanta Falcons fourth overall pick as of right now. Do they stay? Do they move? Most reports indicating that they stay, and it's looking like they're leaning now towards taking Kyle Pitts, the all everything weapon out of Florida. We got more to come here on second down. Again, Ian Anderson, an unbelievable night against the Cubs as the Braves shut out the Cubs 5-0, but also off to an amazingly historic start. I know a lot of Max Fried, a lot of Mike Soroka talk last year, but could Ian Anderson be the best out of the bunch? We'll dive into that when we come back right here on second down. Second Down on ESPN Radio is presented to you by the Uniform Source. Christian Gokel, glad to have you hanging out with us on this Wednesday afternoon. As again, we are just 1 day removed or 1 day out from the first round of the NFL draft. A lot of answers going to be, hey, listen, Atlanta Falcons, Kyle Pitts. I'm excited for that offense, but a lot of answers coming up tomorrow to a lot of questions that are out there. And one of the biggest ones remaining, what does San Francisco do with that third pick? We'll discuss it coming up on 3 and Out here in a little bit. Ben Troop, Kevin Thomas going to be on with us today. And again, the Atlanta Falcons have a big decision to make at 4. We'll catch up with D. Orlando Ledbetter from the AJC. He covers the Falcons better than anyone doing it. And he will let us know his thoughts and what he's hearing from the Falcons brain trust of Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith. Apparently, yesterday they gave their thoughts to one Arthur Blank, the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, not getting in there like Jerry Jones to say, hey, here's who you're drafting. But he wanted to know, and I get it. Listen, if you own the team, you don't have to wait. You don't have to read the ESPN.com articles. You don't have to look at the mock drafts to find out who the team's going to draft. You just call the 2 employees in and you say, hey, who you guys drafting? So Arthur Blank getting the insider knowledge there, and we will all find out tomorrow night when the Falcons pick at 4 what their plan was. But another Atlanta team trying to get back above 500. Now have won a few games in a row. The Atlanta Braves take down the Cubs 5-0 last night, and it was behind a huge performance. I should say another huge performance by Ian Anderson. He goes 7 innings, only gives up 1 hit, and it was just an off-the-plate slider that the Cubs slapped into left field, but only gives up 1 hit, no earned runs, sits down 8 Cubs via strikeout, and only walks 1 batter. And we said it last segment, a historic start for Ian Anderson so far. Over his 15 career starts, and this is including playoffs, he has a 1.91 ERA. And I think last year we saw a bunch of guys grow up in the playoffs for the Atlanta Braves as they made that run to the NLCS. We're just a game short of making it to the World Series, but I don't think anyone stood out more than Ian Anderson. Just the games that he was able to go out there and duel against some really good pitchers. So again, 1.91 ERA for Ian Anderson and 15 career starts, including the playoffs. How about this? First pitcher in the live ball era. If you start any sentence like that, you know your pitcher's doing something well. Hopefully it's not, I gave up like 20 home runs or something like that. First pitcher in the live ball era, so since 1920, to have 3 starts of at least 6 innings and no more than 1 hit allowed among his first 11 games. Now, that's regular season that they're including there. 6 innings, no more than 1 hit allowed among his first 11 games. It's been a historic start for Ian Anderson on the mound for the Atlanta Braves. Him and Charlie Morton, and more so Anderson than Morton, has just been a bright spot for the Atlanta Braves so far this year, really carrying the flag right now for that rotation as you have guys like Max Fried, Mike Soroka right now on the IL and waiting. Hopefully Max Fried back sooner than later, but we still have no word really on Mike Soroka. But you got to think, once Fried gets healthy and he gets back to what we saw from Max Fried last year, and if Mike Soroka can get back to some semblance of what he was, this rotation is going to be scary for the next few years for the Atlanta Braves. But Ian Anderson is still technically a rookie, right? I think Jeff Francoeur was saying on a broadcast a couple nights ago, or Tom Glavine, he's no longer a prospect because he's been up for 50 games, but he's still a rookie. And he's out there going 7 innings, giving up just 1 hit against a good Cubs lineup. He had a very similar performance in his last start up in New York. He loves pitching in New York, but just shut down the Yankees a couple starts ago. So just a phenomenal start to his career for Ian Anderson. And really, we could be looking 5-6 years down the line and saying, yeah, you have 3 great pitchers in Fried, Soroka, and Anderson, but Anderson's the guy. He's the ace, and he has that ace stuff, the upper 90s fastball, 96, 97 when he wants it. He's got a good curveball, but the changeup is what's just filthy with Ian Anderson. He used that a bunch last night. Just they call it the sword when you kind of swing through, and he's just like nothing. You just kind of stop your swing because you know you're connecting with nothing. A lot of swords last night for Ian Anderson. Also, just another absolute bomb from Ronald Acuna, 481-foot home run. And just one of those ones where you watched it and just clean. As soon as it touched the bat, you knew it was gone. The entire stadium knew it was gone. He sends that one 481 feet into the left field stands, and now tied for the league lead in home runs at 8. And that's impressive But when you start going through Ronald Acuna's start to the year, and this is missing a few games with that abdominal injury, right now he is tied for the league lead in runs with 23, tied with Mike Trout. He's also tied with Mike Trout for the most runs created so far this season with 30 of them. And he's currently second in extra base hits right now. I mean, Ronald Acuna's season is off to an amazing start, even missing those games, having to get back into a rhythm. It was great. There was a couple of announcer curses last night, but one of them they were talking, I think it was Tom Glavine again, just talking about how long is it going to take Ronald Acuna to get back into a groove. And I think literally as soon as groove left his mouth, Ronald Acuna deposited the ball 481 feet into the stand. So a big night for the Braves. I know it felt good for Braves fans out there to finally have a game where you weren't having to hold your breath the entire time. I think the only other time you can really think about that was the 13-4 game in Chicago, but that was coming on the heels of you getting beat 13-4. But a big 5-0 win. The bullpen comes in, they do their job. You get a nice close. Webb, a little shaky in the ninth inning. Thought he might give up a run there, but he's able to come back and hold on and complete the shutout for the Atlanta Braves. But some other good performances that we have seen so far. Ozzie Albies starting to get back on the right track. When he starts shooting the ball the other way, he starts golfing the balls that are down by his feet, which has really kind of become his signature. You think you can go down and in on him with a ball that's an inch off the dirt, and he just absolutely rakes. He's got like a golf swing, especially when he's batting left-handed. He hit one to the wall on a line. Jason Hayward kind of misplayed it, but still good to see him get a double. He was 2 for 4 last night, had a run and an RBI. Dansby Swanson, another guy who's slowly starting to see his batting average creep up. He goes 3 for 4 last night with a run and an RBI, but we've talked about this over and over again with Dansby Swanson. You can tell when he's in a rut because he's pulling everything. It'll be a slider 2-3 inches off the plate, and he's pulling it down the third base line. That's not what you want to see out of Dansby Swanson. When Dansby Swanson is really going, he's getting his arms extended and he's getting the ball into the other field. Did that a couple of times in the game last night, and again had an RBI. Kind of a rough night for Freddie Freeman at the plate. Only a .213 batting average for him so far this year, but he's currently third in Major League Baseball with 19 walks, and I believe he's tied for first in intentional walks with 3 of those, but still able to earn 16 walks so far this season. It's what Freddie Freeman does, and I think a lot of that has to do with Marcell Azuna's struggles. People feel like they can pitch around Freddie Freeman a little bit more. Marcell Ozuna slowly starting to turn it around a little bit. He only 1 for 5 last night, but he did have 2 rockets right at the shortstop. But if they are a couple of feet higher, doubles for Marcell Ozuna easily there. So he's starting to see the ball well and starting to hit it really hard. Once he gets going, I feel like this offense is going to be where you imagined it was going to be at the start of the year. But again, 5 runs last night. I'm going to be curious to see what they decide to do at center field when you do get Pache and you do get Inciarte back. I think there's been a couple of guys who have made some noise at center field who might be keeping their job, or do you put Pache back because you feel like he's going to be your center fielder for the next few years? So there's some storylines remaining to be seen from the Braves, but they do have another game tonight against the Cubs. Actually, 2 more games coming up against the Cubs before they hit the road. But tonight you'll go up against Kyle Kendricks. He's currently sitting on a 5.68 ERA. Huascar Ynoa will get the ball for the Braves tonight. He has a 3.68 ERA. And Braves fans will remember Kyle Hendricks. We saw him when the Braves were in Chicago during that 13-4 win for the Braves. The Braves knocked him out after 4 innings. He gave up 7 hits, 7 earned runs, and 4 home runs in that game. Hopefully the offense with a repeat performance against Kyle Hendricks coming up tonight. We will have the full coverage for you of that coming up a little bit later tonight. First pitch slotted for 7:20. Again, Braves have one more game with the Cubs after that. That one's going to be broadcast on MLB Network. Braves have not named a starter for that one, but it does look like they'll be facing Adbert Alzolay for the Chicago Cubs coming up in the final game of this series. And then the Braves hit the road for a 6-game road trip where they, bear with me here, travel south to take on the Toronto Blue Jays, who are playing in their spring training site in Dunedin, Florida right now with that sweet capacity of 5,000 fans down there in Florida. So head down, 3-game set with the Blue Jays, and then they'll head up to Washington to take on the Nationals, who have hit the skids a little bit in a 3-game set as well before they come home and face the Phillies during another homestand there. So Braves two more with the Cubs, and hitting the road for a 6-game homestand coming up. And speaking of capacity, a little bit of news breaking just before the show today in regards to the Atlanta Braves. They have announced that as of May 7th, Truist Park will expand its capacity to 100%. You will be able to fill up Truist Park. Full release is up on the Braves website right now. I believe you're still asking to be wearing masks when you go into Truist Park, but 100% capacity going to be allowed as soon as May 7th coming up for the Atlanta Braves. If you bear with me for a second, I will tell you that would be when the Braves welcome in the Phillies for the start of their next homestand. And that's another one that people have been marking off, seeing maybe the return of Max Fried. Maybe you start getting some news around Mike Soroka as well. So again, when the Braves take on the Phillies coming up on May 7th, it's a Friday, 100% capacity at Truist Park as we slowly but certainly start to get back to normal in the sports world. We got more to come here. Again, a lot of breaking news around the NFL draft. We have a trade to talk about involving a quarterback when we come back. Does that affect anything in the draft? And just the latest on what we're hearing around the Atlanta Falcons in round one. Christian Gokel here on Second Down on ESPN Radio. We're streaming live on ESPNCoastal.com. You can also catch us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Christian Gokel, glad you're hanging out with us here on this Wednesday afternoon. We'll be right back after this. Christian Gokel, glad to have you hanging out with us on this Wednesday afternoon. A lot to get into coming up on the show today. We'll catch up with D. Orlando Ledbetter from the AJC. He'll give us his thoughts on what the Atlanta Falcons are going to do with the 4th overall pick. A little bit later in the show, we'll catch up with Dave Choate from the Falcoholic. Again, his thoughts on where you go with the 4th pick. But then after that, where do the Atlanta Falcons go in this draft? A lot of question marks on this roster right now. I know the secondary is a huge question mark for the Atlanta Falcons right now. DeMonte KZ is gone. Isaiah Oliver is gone. You have Keanu Neal, former first-round pick, is out the door as well. So who are going to be those guys that are going to step up for you on the outside? Is it Darqueze Dennard outside for you? I don't even know if they've renegotiated that contract yet with Dennard. He was a guy you brought in last year. Is it Tyler Hall? Do you trust the second-year guy out of Wyoming there to step up and make moves for you? You've brought in free safety Eric Harris. You've also brought in Daron Harmon. But are those guys that you really trust out there in the secondary? I think you're going to have to with Harmon and Harris out there. You still have Jalen Hawkins at strong safety, a guy a lot of people think the safety out of Cal could step up and be a big part of the team, but is yet to be seen. So who are those corners out there that are going to step up? Is it Sherrod Niesman for you out there? I think there's a lot of question marks in that secondary, but my biggest concern surrounding the Atlanta Falcons in this draft, and again, it's not fair to do this to the current staff with the Atlanta Falcons, projecting Thomas Dimitrov's picks on them, but it's just what we've dealt with as Atlanta Falcons fans. The thing they can't do in this draft, and I don't think they can afford to do, is be desperate and pick a guy just because you need to fill that position. When you look at this draft, it is not a good defensive line draft, right? I was listening to Get Up a little bit earlier, and if the Atlanta Falcons, if there was that game-changing defensive lineman, it would absolutely be in play for the Falcons at 4, right? If you had an edge rusher that was just dominant, a Myles Garrett-like talent, a Von Miller kind of talent, he would immediately shoot up to the top of almost every team's board, but certainly for the Atlanta Falcons. But there's not that kind of talent in this draft. I think the consensus number 1 defensive lineman is Christian Barmore, the redshirt sophomore out of Alabama. But again, is he as good as some of the other guys that have come out of Alabama the past few years? A'Shawn Robinson, Jaron Reed, is he that good, or is he just the best defensive lineman available? What I don't think the Atlanta Falcons can afford to do is start reaching on guys just because you need to fill that position. Luckily for the Falcons, I believe that this is a very deep corner class. I think you'll probably be able to get, if you want to, with your second pick, a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. there. With your second pick, maybe Greg Newsome falls to you from Northwestern. He's a guy a lot of people think is going to be a mid-20s pick because he was hurt and missed a lot of games this past season at Northwestern, but a big, tall corner that can make a lot of plays. Does he fall to the Atlanta Falcons? A couple of Georgia guys, Tyson Campbell. Is he a guy the Atlanta Falcons can make a move for? Tall, rangy, amazingly fast. Speaking of amazingly fast, Eric Stokes, 4.2 40 speed out of the University of Georgia, and really a ball hawk. Just a guy, the ball just has kind of sticky hands, right? The ball just kind of finds its way to Eric Stokes there. Is he a guy you can get a little bit later in the draft? Just don't reach, because I do think this is an amazingly talented draft. And when you get to your pick in the second round, somebody's going to fall to you that will immediately make your team better. Is it going to be in a position that you really need it? Is it going to be a defensive lineman? Unless Christian Barmore falls, no, it's not going to be a defensive lineman. If you're drafting there, it's probably going to be a guy who's graded out as a late second, early third pick at defensive lineman. And if you want to stay mediocre, that's what you do. You draft a guy around early because it, quote unquote, fills a position of need, versus there's going to be some difference makers at the offensive line positions, at running back. I mean, Travis Etienne is the ACC's all-time leading rusher. If somehow he falls out of the first round and falls into your lap, which I don't think he will, and I think every GM at the end of the first round and at the top of the second round would be kicking themselves if they let him fall to the Falcons, you have to grab him, even though running back might not be your most pressing position of need, because he's clearly the best player on the board right now. But I won't be able to get over it if the Atlanta Falcons go out there and draft a defensive lineman who's graded out again as a third round pick when you have so many offensive linemen available. I mean, I think Tevin Jenkins out of Oklahoma State, some people see him maybe sliding out. He'd be a great pick. I think Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State would be a really good pick. Alex Leatherwood out of Alabama would be a great pick. There's a lot of offensive linemen out there. I mean, you need a center. Alex Mack no longer with the Atlanta Falcons. Landon Dickerson, 6'6, 325-pound center, a member of just the all everything offensive line for Alabama last year, national champion. I think that'd be a great pick. Just don't reach for that guy who you have slotted 20 picks down on your big board because he quote unquote fills a position of need. And I know we have seen the Atlanta Falcons do that time and time again on this team. I mean, listen, I hate to say it, and it's not fair to do it to somebody who was just a rookie last year, but the Atlanta Falcons did it in the first round last year. You had clearly the best player available, CeeDee Lamb, that you could have taken. And I get you don't need more receivers. I mean, you don't think you need more receivers, but you had CeeDee Lamb sitting there right there, and instead you reached for a corner. And you can tell me all you want to that everyone's like, oh, well, if you let him go, then he was immediately going to get snatched up. That's fine. Let somebody else reach. Let somebody else reach. You stay mediocre when you continually draft guys because you need them versus going out and getting the best guy on your board. I mean, look at what the Ravens do. Watch what the Steelers do. Watch what the teams who are always winning, right? We talked about it. Steelers, I think, are the gold standard in the NFL. I think what the Patriots did was unbelievable. You had the best quarterback in the history of football, but that's hard to replicate, right? It's hard to be like, okay, we're going to go out there and get the best quarterback ever, and then we're going to win 6 Super Bowls. You can't base your franchise off that, but I think you can base your franchise off what the Steelers do, which is just the model of consistency. Haven't been under 500 since 2003. Think about that. Atlanta Falcons have been under 500 the past 3 years. I think before Matt Ryan arrived, had never had back-to-back winning seasons, right? So if you want to model yourself after a franchise, I'm trying to model after the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what do they consistently do? They consistently go out there and draft the best player available. And then you're sort of kicking yourself and you're saying, man, why don't we grab that guy? He was available. It's, well, we needed an offensive lineman. So we picked a guy that probably could have gotten a little bit later in the draft, but we felt like we needed him. So we grabbed that guy. We really needed AJ Terrell at corner. Could we have had 3 or 4 other guys who were clearly ahead of him and probably are better players in the NFL? Yeah. But we needed a corner. That's where my worry still remains. And it's just, again, it's not fair to do that right now to Terry Fontenot because Terry Fontenot does not have a draft history. He was the director of pro scouting with the New Orleans Saints, which, for those of you following along, he was in charge of scouting other NFL players, pretty much scouting every other player in the NFL. So if a trade came up, if they became free agents, also helping with the game planning, but mostly with inside of roster transactions. You had a scouting report on every other player in the NFL. So when it came to trades, when it came to negotiations, when it came to free agency, you were able to go out there and immediately be prepared. That was Terry Fontenot. And obviously he did a good job because the Saints had a nightmare of a cap situation too, but they always seemed to be able to bring in a really good free agent and solidify that team in the last few years of Drew Brees. So, I mean, he was responsible for getting them their now probably future quarterback in Jameis Winston there. So I don't think it's fair to project our doubts and our past pain, I guess, on Terry Fontenot. And that's like, I know exactly what we're doing as Atlanta Falcons fans, just holding our breaths and waiting for our team to mess it up. But what we can't do, and what I'm really going to watch, because it's going to define the Falcons for the next probably at least half a decade, is how these guys go out and attack the draft. I know there's contract or there's cap space issues that you have to worry about right now, and you have to get guys who are cheap and who can play immediately. But I think if you're focusing on 2021 and you're not focusing on 2022 through 2025, we're in for a rough next half of a decade as Atlanta Falcons fans. We got more to come here on Second Down. Again, big show coming up on 3 and Out. We'll get you a preview of that. Also, Atlanta Braves coming up a little bit later in the show. If you miss any portion of the show, you can catch it on ESPNCoastal.com, also Spotify and Apple Podcast as well. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back into Second Down right here on ESPN Radio. Christian Gokel, glad you're hanging out with us on this Wednesday afternoon. Just 1 day away from the first round of the NFL draft. We'll have full coverage coming up for you tomorrow. Again, Charlie Campbell, WalterFootball.com, going to hop on the show with us, the most accurate mock drafter of all of the analysts covering NFL football. We'll catch up with him at the top of the show tomorrow. Also, Brooks Austin on tomorrow to break down Georgia players who we could see go off early in the draft and what positions they might be filling for some teams out there. I know Monty Rice, a guy who's flying up a lot of people's boards. I know Georgia fans watching him the last few years know just a mauler out there, a big-time tackler. So we'll catch up with Brooks Austin about that. Also, Savannah State head football coach Sean Quinn going to be on the show tomorrow. We'll talk draft with him. They have an event coming up, so we'll break all that down with Sean Quinn. But coming up a little bit later today on 3 and Out, catch up with D. Orlando Ledbetter, covers the Falcons for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. No one better in the business, so we'll get D-Led's thoughts on where the Atlanta Falcons are going to go tomorrow night. Also going to catch up with the Falcoholic himself, Dave Choate. What are his first-round predictions? Do the Falcons move back? And also, where do they go in rounds 2 through 7? But we did say we had some quarterback news for you out there, and how does it affect the draft coming up? The Carolina Panthers have dealt quarterback Teddy Bridgewater to the Denver Broncos in a move a lot of people saw coming, not necessarily the team that they were sending him to, but getting Teddy Bridgewater out of town with the addition of Sam Darnold. They is now going to be a quarterback with the Denver Broncos. They only have to give up a 6th-round pick to get Teddy Bridgewater in. The Panthers will pay $7 million to Teddy Bridgewater, and then the Broncos will pay him a $3 million salary following the trade. So Teddy Bridgewater headed out to the Mile High City. Wish Cody was on the show today because I know quarterback situation out there is one of the things he's losing sleep over at night. But again, you got Drew Lock out at Denver. Now you have Teddy Bridgewater. So that maybe you get your veteran quarterback in there if Drew Lock doesn't work out. Does that take the Denver Broncos out of the running for a quarterback? Because I know it's been them and it's been the New England Patriots as two of the few teams that people see trying to trade up to number 4 with the Atlanta Falcons to get their future franchise quarterback. Denver currently has the number 9 overall pick. So does that take them out of the running for drafting a quarterback? I would say no. I think Teddy Bridgewater is a guy, if anything, would be a stopgap while you get your rookie quarterback ready. But also they've now leveraged some draft capital, just a 6th-round pick, but still they've leveraged some draft capital to get a quarterback in there. Are they going to leverage even more? On the Atlanta Falcons, my starting price is your 1st-round pick plus 2 more, because that's what the San Francisco 49ers were able to earn. I know Peter King published a story a little bit earlier today where he said an NFL GM quoted him and said, listen, San Francisco 49ers just completely ruined the market for moving up in this draft because they gave up so much to get to number 3. Again, they gave up this year's 1st-rounder, their 1st-rounder in 2022 and 2023. And I think they gave up a 3rd-rounder as well inside that deal. So they have just completely reset the market. It's like when a quarterback gets that new deal, and then all of a sudden all the other quarterbacks that are coming up for new deals are like, hey, calling their agent, like, you see what that guy got? Yeah, I want that plus more. Just completely resetting the market for this year's draft. And it's crazy to me how valuable these picks are becoming, specifically in this draft, because for whatever reason, people feel like there's upwards of 6 guys, 7 guys who are going to be bona fide NFL starters coming up. And there's at least 5 guys in the 1st round who they feel like are going to be eventually starters coming up this year. You got to think Trey Lance is a guy, if a team drafts him, they're going to want him to be ready to go at least midway through the year, unless it's a team like the Atlanta Falcons that has a bona fide quarterback right now. Justin Fields is going to be a guy off the board early that a lot of teams feel like can be a franchise quarterback. Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson are obviously locked in. Is it Mac Jones at number 3? And if he doesn't go number 3, how far does he slide? Some people think the 49ers are the only team interested in drafting him that high, and the rest of the teams, if they fall to him, maybe they take him. If not, we're not leveraging ourselves for Mac Jones. So a lot of questions yet to be answered. But again, just another wild card added in there as the Carolina Panthers have traded Teddy Bridgewater to the Denver Broncos. But the news a little bit earlier in the show, Dan Graziano alongside Jeremy Fowler with the direct quote, Atlanta is expected to stay put and take Pitts, whom some would tell you is the best player in the entire draft. Well, who better to talk to about Kyle Pitts and what he could potentially bring to this Atlanta Falcons offense. Then Ben Troop, the tight end, a former tight end for the University of Florida All-American, a member of the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame, coming up here in about 2 minutes on ESPN Radio. You'll be able to catch him and Kevin Thomas on 3 and Out. They're going to dive into that conversation. Also look back at Ian Anderson and the performance he had last night, which is an unbelievable start to his career so far. Also today, National Superhero Day. So we have some college football comps coming up for you a little bit later in the show as well. And then some truly great sleeper picks from the history of SEC and ACC schools. There's always guys that seem to fall to the 4th, 5th, 6th round, maybe even undrafted, who just go on to have great NFL careers. We'll look at some of the greats out of the SEC and the ACC. First one comes to mind, and it should come to your mind, Terrell Davis, former University of Georgia running back, falls all the way to the 6th round to Denver. I think the famous play he had in his rookie preseason, I think it was on punt coverage, where he just absolutely annihilated the kick returner, kind of turned some heads. Shanahan, the coach out there, kind of turned some heads and said, "Who's that guy? That guy could play some football." Goes on, 3-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Denver Broncos, ran for over 2,000 yards in a season. So just guys like that, guys who have slid later into the draft but have gone on to be great NFL pros. We'll dive into that coming up a little bit later on the show as well. And then, again, we're going to have another conversation about not reaching. Now, I don't want people to think I'm saying you shouldn't take certain positions at certain points in the draft. All I'm saying is if you have a draft board, stick to it. Now, if you have 2 guys and you have them graded out similarly, sure, take the guy that fills a position of need versus a position that you already feel pretty comfortable with. But if you have a guy who's graded 20 spots ahead of another guy, please, for the love of everything, for the love of Atlanta sports fans everywhere, take that best player available, and we'll get to work after that. Still so many questions left to be answered from the Atlanta Falcons. It's looking more and more like Julio Jones for all the trade talk out there. We'll be around at least until June 1st when some of that dead money comes off the board, and the Falcons, for a better deal, could move Julio Jones. Teams that have been mentioned around that, Green Bay Packers, and I think that's a great fit for both sides involved. You can probably ask the Green Bay Packers, who are in a win-now mode with Aaron Rodgers getting later in his career and really saying he doesn't know what his future holds with the Green Bay Packers. I think you could probably get a 1st-round pick out of the Packers, and I think that has to be the starting price for Julio Jones, at least this year, unless you want to hold on to him for another year and then just get what you can for him. But this year, with as good as Julio Jones has been, and everyone wants to say he's hurt all the time, last year was the first time we've ever seen Julio Jones play in less than 10 games. And this is just speculation, but I think that might have a lot to do with the fact that the team was out of contention about 5 games into the season. What's the point of pushing it back? So many questions left to be answered, but we will get a ton of answers tomorrow when we see the first round of the NFL draft. But coming up here after the break, Kevin Thomas, Ben Troop on 3 and Out. They'll break down all of these questions. Again, Ben Troop, former Gator tight end, going to break down Kyle Pitts, who is a great Gator tight end, next.